context, non-pecuniary, if it's loyalty, other stuff, ESG, other things that are non-maximizers, and all the ethical stuff. And the question is it only like these academics talking about these things, or I wanted to know if what is the feeling on the ground? So we really wanted to. We looked. On one hand, we got a team of very established academics, but have also a strong knowledge with what's happening on the ground. If it's Eugene Soltes from Harvard Business School, who wrote a book that I'm so sorry I didn't read. I read only now this year of the group. Why did they do it? Right? That's exactly. Because really, it's exactly on the theme that we're doing in the group, and gave us like the stories there really gave a lot of food for thought. So that's Eugene. If it's Donald Langevoort, that also was very kind also to present presentations and join some of our workshops, our weekly workshops of this group. And Don, besides being one of the important academics in this area and scholars of corporate law, Don was also, I think he's one of the first researchers who started marching in the direction that we're just marching after him as a trailblazer of taking behavioral ethics insights and applying them in the corporate law context. But besides that, also Don also was in this enforcement in the SEC and has much on the ground knowledge from there. And also, of course, we have Professor Zohar Goshen, which I was sorry that I just missed him in the Hebrew U when I studied there. I think it was a year or two before he left, so I just missed him, and it's one of my greatest regrets in my academic development. But here, we got him here now, and also Zohar, I think especially the Israelis, I think also the Americans, besides being a corporate law professor in the Columbia Law School, he was also the chair of the Israeli SEC. So also he can give us, I hope we'll have some juicy bits on regarding things working on the ground. But to tell you the truth, at the beginning when we envisioned this kind of session, so we were thinking more of bringing a real wrongdoer, getting like the internal perspective of a wrongdoer, and and unfortunately, that's the worst thing about about all of them, Don, Zohar, and Eugene. I'm sorry that none of them are wrongdoers. I can't put that on your list, and we won't get that, even though. So it's a bit disappointing.
That's why I'm here.
Yeah, of course. I even tried to email some. I heard that you have these like wrongdoers. I don't want to even say names that are famous and going to places and and they're having confessions regarding their. But for some reasons, after I sent them an email, "Are you willing to talk?" I got no replies. I don't know why, but with no further ado, let's get into it. So my main question is what I would want to hear. I think we would like to hear. That's my impression. But after, like I told them in the email yesterday and today, after my initial engagement, everyone here in the panel is free to delve in with his questions. But as a starting point, what I would suggest, what I would like to hear, I would like to hear your perspectives. With also on the one hand your academic knowledge, on the other hand some on the ground familiarity. How pervasive do each of you think is a non-pecuniary motivations for corporate wrongdoing? Now, of course, this is a very big question, and you can categorize, whatever, you got what I'm saying, where I'm heading to, into categories. Fitting it into categories. Categorize. Great. That's what I brought. This is not the wrongdoing.
I'm still the wrongdoer. I want this part. That's right.
But so I'm giving it to you also to categorize into the various kinds of wrongdoing. And like I also requested you, if you can give the examples you can provide with names, without names, I think would be very useful for these academics that are more aloof and disconnected from the ground. At least some of us, at least I can say about myself. So maybe we should start with Eugene. I'll go according how to the things that are on my screen. We'll start with Eugene, and then Don, and then Zohar. So Eugene.
Oh, great. Well, thanks so much, and thanks for the invitation to join in. Hopefully, next time it'll be to get together in person. But thrilled to share some thoughts on this topic, which is very much up my alley. I thought maybe the first thing is just to kind of set the stage. Is how often this kinds of misconduct occurs, because obviously we can think about the really kind of colorful, like Madoff-like fraud, but that's very extreme, as is Enron and Theranos. I think the more interesting issue is kind of what I think of as the ubiquitous everyday kind of misconduct that's going on inside of firms. Just some statistics to kind of level set. I checked across one of the larger hotline providers at some of my own data, and I took just a quick kind of peak this morning. Last year, let's say the average firm, and we're talking these are global firms. If you took a firm of 10,000 people, the average firm received 140 allegations of misconduct last year. Out of those, 40% are substantiated. So basically, you're talking about things that even firms see themselves, detect, and note. You're talking like 50 to 60 things per year. For a firm like 10,000, we're not talking ginormous firms. 10,000, that's like a modestly sized firm. You're talking like roughly 2/3 of those I would call are in the HR front, and roughly 1/3 are in the financial misreporting, embezzlement, fraud, what we really think are like the legal compliance type violations. So we're talking that there's actually like a non-trivial amount of frequency associated with these things. Getting to the why behind it. So we know there's a lot going on. I think a lot of firms, what historically they've done is kind of ignored the why until it's a big deal, and they end up having to go and hire outside counsel and producing like a root cause report. So in the US, if any matter goes in front of, for example, the Department of Justice, the first thing the DOJ is going to ask for is, what was the root cause? And you hire external counsel, which comes in and produces, the 150-page report. Pointing, I think not always correctly, but pointing at some individual or controller process. What's been happening, which is I think pretty neat over the last couple of years, is firms have started to see that, well, maybe we don't need to just do a root cause when it's like the one kind of potential really significant matter, like an FCPA violation that's going to go in front of like the DOJ. But actually, every time we have one of these compliance violations, let's just know what's actually seems to be the why behind it. So the investigator who finds a substantiate issue. So out of those 140, we have those 50 substantiate issues a year. Let's just put kind of out of a list, like what are the reasons behind that? And I can say, looking at some of the data, and this is not something I've written up yet, but is kind of in the process. Of course, you start to see things like rationalization. You start to see people are like some of the people for embezzlement, they're just trying to take something home. So it's like a rationalization. But some of the reasons that are popping up when we start talking about this high level of frequency are no controls in place, policy process complexity, like people don't understand that they can't do it, ineffective policy. So it's like literally not translated to the language, and a lack of training. Like people find lots of clever ways to do things that it's because it's the show me where it says I can't. There wasn't a policy in place. And if you're not talking a super large like financial firm or pharma firm, there's a lot of things that people didn't write down. And so people are clever and think that you can do. And so when I'm giving maybe these kind of non-sinister reasons where you see a lot of these violations, which are not around people wanting to necessarily take a pile of money, but people think that it's implicitly tolerated within the organization. So those are at least maybe some of, I'm going to turn over to others now, but some of maybe at least the initial thoughts when you frame this question, how I think about this issue.
Yeah, let me jump in. Eugene's absolutely right. You have to look along a spectrum. What kind of wrongdoing are we talking about? Is it wholesale? The kinds of things you see at financial services firms on a daily basis because there's so much interaction and so much money at stake. Are we talking about high level misbehavior? Let me go to the high level because that's a lot that we were talking about yesterday, where there seems to be some form of managerial misconduct. I use a template that I think works very well as a possibility, a going in possibility, when you're trying to deconstruct what happened and prepare the report that Eugene was talking about. I have to start with a nod toward conventional economics. I don't think there's any doubt that we as a society, we as a legal system, under-enforce most laws that interact with managerial accountability. And that fact is salient. But so is the pain that sometimes comes when the norm isn't followed, which is people get away with it, but they get caught. So what's the template for thinking about high-level wrongdoing? I call it the optimism commitment whipsaw. Basically, it's, I think, in corporate promotion tournaments, senior executives move to the top because they have certain traits that are survivor traits, that are things that get you to the top. So what we're looking for are executives who have diminished risk perception, diminished risk aversion, that can come from overconfidence, overoptimism, egotistical or egocentric construals, the ability to internalize that it's okay to do this, it's okay to press, it's okay to take risks. That's step one. Do we observe that in the executives in question? Secondly, then those kinds of people end up on the slippery slope very easily. It's easy if you're risk seeking to take those first small steps that may seem innocent and start moving down the slope such that you've rationalized this until you're near the bottom, at which point perception kicks in, but you're knee deep in big muddy, to use an old-fashioned phrase, to capture all of this. So it's systemic. It's traits that create movement that buy into wrongdoing in ways that, in the end, inflate the possibility that that wrongdoing was going to occur. So I'll pass it on to Zohar. I think thinking in those terms is worth discussion, because we're going to get in, I'm sure, to boardroom behavior and compliance systems, because I think those insights help a lot. So Zohar, you're next.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Don. And thank you so much for the invitation to join. I'm very happy to join you in this. I wish I could do it in person. So when I started my career in corporate law, as you all know, the main thesis is agency cost. And the most important assumption of agency cost theory is that whatever an agent can take, they will take. Meaning, if we are going to leave $1,000 on the table and make an experiment according to this theory, then if you tell the participants that they are not going to be caught for taking the money, all of them will take the money. But we know that it's not
true. The wallet, we had
We know we know people don't behave this way. We know it's not true that that all people will take the money. Some will stay next to it and try to guard the money until the owner will come. Some will take just half of it or whatever. There are many levels of morality and behavior that people adopt for many reasons, but they are not going necessarily to take the whole amount of money. But this assumption in these models basically led to this conception of managers are sinners, shareholders are saints, and the whole concept of regulation and enforcement is within this framework. And that's the way I wrote my articles. That's the way I used to think about the problems until I got to the SEC. And the benefit you get from being the chairman of the SEC is that you have a very strong intelligence department. They have very sophisticated technology. They have human intelligence. They have a lot of tools to give you the picture. And to my surprise, most people are honest for whatever reason. Even when they can steal, they don't steal. The amount of people who would engage in wrongdoing is very minimal compared to the general population of corporations. So that changed the way I think about the law and about enforcement. So I remember I was giving a speech in a conference. Not that I know the exact numbers, but I just wanted to convey this notion that when we regulate, we have to be aware of the trade-off, the effect on the loyal people. So I said, well, my belief is that 95% of the people who work in the stock market are, or in corporation are loyal and honest, and 5% are crooks. And I was hoping that I'm conveying the idea that it is a small minority of people who are engaging in this type of activities. But then I went back home and the headline for the night newspaper was, Goshen, 5% of the participants in the market are crooks. So as you get to see, it's all relative. And from my perspective, once we recognize that there are differences in motivation to do wrongdoing, and some people internally honest for whatever reason, it could be religion, it could be education, it could be culture, whatever reason they hold inside, and others might do the same thing. We like there is this famous saying, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. But there is the Israeli version, which is the road to good intention sometimes is paved with hell. So what I want to say in this context is that once you understand that there is this trade-off, that whatever you do in terms of enforcement, whatever you do in terms of regulation, you inflict cost on 95% of the population, which are the honest people. And you have to be careful when you design the rules about how to deal with the 5%, to be mindful about that. I admit it changed completely. All the articles that I wrote after I got out of the SEC are completely different than the articles I wrote before then. They are more balanced. They see the both sides of the picture. I'm more aware of the trade-offs of that are happening in the real world. And to your question, it's a very limited knowledge. Okay, it's just 3 years in one organization, but and only mostly dealing with the top people and mainly criminal activity. My feeling is that the motivation most of the time is pecuniary. The non-pecuniary drive for this type of actions, if existed, was always tied. You can always find some pecuniary benefit that you can put them together. You have one story, then you see the facts, and when you combine them together, it's up to you to whether you care about the non-pecuniary story or you simply look on the financial motivation. So I'll stop here.
Great. So before I do my follow-up question, I'm opening this. Anyone wants to push general, all three, or one of them? Yuval, yeah, go ahead, Yuval. Great.
So Zohar, so maybe it's a kind of a question about terminology, but I was kind of surprised this notion that according to agency theory, managers are supposed to steal if they can, or they're supposed to maximize their, making a business decision that will maximize their profit. But like, I never thought the idea was that they were actually steal.
No, it's not stealing. It's a strong word. But if you take the classic paper of Jensen and Meckling about agency costs, where they try to quantify the amount of losses you would suffer from hiring the agent or from investing your money with the agent, then you see those graphs and those models. The assumption is whatever the agent can divert to itself, they will divert. And the more legally, of course, legally, yeah. Yeah, it's like it's in their model is buying the corporate jet, the beautiful office, and all of that. But the assumption is that these loyal activities within the legal framework, and if you can, whatever you can take within that framework, you will take the whole amount of it. That's the model. That's the starting model from 1976. Starts with this assumption, and it has many others following up on that assumption.
Okay. Anyone else wants to follow? Yeah, Jesse.
This is a question for Eugene. Hi, Eugene. Good to see you. You said that a lot of the complaints that come through the hotline involve HR issues. Is this like Me Too type problems, or like superiors abusing subordinates, or like what are the types of complaints?
Everything in this bucket. So it's Me Too, it's harassment, discrimination is how you would generally frame it. But that runs the whole gamut from, I'll say last week. So looking at a lot of hotline data, someone's girlfriend called the hotline because her boyfriend was working late because the boss was having him stay and do overtime, and she was really upset and called the hotline. I mean, that's kind of an absurd. That got them. This is like a Fortune 100 company. That's obviously like some of the silly, absurd stuff that gets in there, but there's simultaneously some really serious stuff of bosses compromising people, kind of what you'd say the Me Too assault, pretty overt discrimination. I think the interesting issue here is a lot of the what I call borderline conduct. So I'll give just an example. I'll play, I guess, since we don't have the misconduct person, I'm happy to give plenty of play that role of what those people would be saying. But I mean, so a good example is a project manager who raised an allegation against her boss for basically he asked her out and she declined. But he keeps persisting and asking her out. She's declined again, and now she's not getting on the projects that she wants. She reported that, and this is now turning into retaliation. So she's reported this hotline. It turns out what the project her boss did last week was remove her calendar access on her calendar. Which, if you're a project manager, like in a technology firm, losing calendar access to your boss allows you to basically, you can't coordinate your job, you can't do anything effectively. And then the question is like, the firm needs to investigate, is that actually like a violation? Like your boss removed calendar access, or is that just a mistake? This is the kind of stuff that's coming through these hotlines all the time. And some of them are very black and white where they sit, but a lot of this is this in between, like, should we spend time looking into whether the person should or should not get calendar access?
Gideon?
Thank you very much. So, two questions. They build, at least the first one, on what Zohar said. So Zohar, I wanted to ask the picture that you got as the head of the Israeli SEC, the 95% and the 5%. how much of it you think is the product of the regulatory system that was already implemented, that is in place, that people are honest because it pays to be honest, or where you think honest people to begin with. So if we are to let our guard down and just say, okay, people are good, and we can do away with some of those regulations in order not to harm the 95%, would that be a good idea, you think?
I'm not arguing that we should not have laws that prohibit wrongdoing. That's not my argument. My argument is thinking about the proportion. Okay, so when you think we try to evaluate any part of the regulation, you need to understand the proportion. What's the pros and cons of doing anything which will take that into account. So after since I knew I wouldn't get the honest answer if I would make the survey while I'm in office, I waited until I retired, and then I went maybe 20 people who I knew from the market, and I asked them for coffee and asked them about their motivation. What is that? Why did you manage in this way? What you are afraid of? What you're trying to achieve? And I was surprised by the reasons that they were giving me. Most of them were giving me reasons that any of us will align with, or some will not agree, but we can align in terms of our social values and what they are trying to do. So in terms of number one, from what I can give you is that in terms of their internal motivation is their reputation in the market. So reputation plays huge role in the way they want to be conceived by the community, the way they want to be conceived by the other players in the market. It's one thing to make your money because you cheated someone, is another thing to make your money because you invented something which is very valuable. And people wants to play golf with people who would look at them and say, this is a smart person who made money in the good way, not in the wrong way. So my feeling was that reputation is a major driver. Keeping your reputation intact, whether this is with criminal activities or with illegitimate or something that people would think that you are expropriating them in the civil arena or the private arena, they were very mindful of that. Okay, so that's I'm talking now on the bad side. I'm not expanding on the good side, what they wanted to achieve on the good side. But in terms of what they avoided, I think that the number one, it's not a sophisticated empirical study. These are 20 people that I went after I finished and just have a conversation and coffee with them. That's what I can convey.
So my second question, and there are two main takeaways that I got from your answer. One is that I need to invent something important, and then that I need to learn how to play golf. So that's on my to-do list. But my second question to all the panelists. So we are very interested in what we call soft conflicts of interest. And again, Zohar, it's a bit of a follow-up on your answer. So I take it that how we are perceived by others and also by ourselves is something that matters to us. I mean, we don't want to think of ourselves as cheaters, as unethical people. But what if, I'm facing soft conflicts of interest? I can do something through my corporation for a cause I believe in, let's say the environment, let's say some social causes, and this is something that Eugene and I once discussed in a different forum. Or that I can help a friend, not my spouse or my significant other, but someone else. And yeah, it's not the best deal for the company, but it's good enough. I'm still turning a profit. What should be the approach, if any, to soft conflicts of interest in the view of the panelists?
I'll start out. There are obviously lots of answers to the question. Yeah, it goes back to in what context are we talking about? A lot of my current work relates to the design of compliance programs. And there, the soft conflict of interest question is a very big one. Just by way of background, and I think many people will be interested in the phrasing of all of this. Just very recently, the Securities and Exchange Commission in the United States put into place a rule that requires every company to devote appropriate resources to the identification of all conflicts of interest and their mitigation, their elimination, and their disclosure. The definition of conflict of interest is this, and this should pique the interest of any. Conflict of interest means an interest that might incline the broker-dealer consciously or unconsciously to make a recommendation that is not disinterested. That's a way of saying that there's an affirmative legal requirement now to go looking for the soft and the hard, and to ask psychology questions as well as standard economics questions. I think it's often the soft conflict of interest, going back to what I was saying before about slippery slopes, the soft conflicts of interest that start you down the road to harder ones. And so from the standpoint of compliance design, I think any plan to interdict conflicts that can become serious have to start with the soft ones.
Eugene, would you like to answer Gideon's?
Yeah, Gideon, I'm thinking maybe I'll give a hypothetical because I'm trying to think about the incentives to individuals and the benefits they're receiving. And I'll say, I'll give maybe a hypothetical, or not a hypothetical, an example from last week that I've been pondering, in that people may have heard that one of the founders of Ethereum gave $1 billion of a crypto coin to the Indian COVID fund. And it was actually widely praised in the news as, India's suffering a lot. $1 billion would go a long way to a fund that only had $7 million. Great. And this was a fairly obscure non-liquid coin that apparently he was like airdropped and just received out of the thin air. Immediately when I saw this story pop up, I thought of this as like basically some like brilliantly clever like tax deduction of something that's not that valuable, because immediately the coin is not liquid and basically no one's trading it. So when he sold it, it immediately dropped 40%. Like if he tried to actually like use that, it would probably only worth like a couple $1 million. But on paper and how we value the tax deduction, it's $1 billion. And the guy's worth $20 billion as a 27-year-old. So he's going to get $1 billion tax deduction. He gets to be this like savior of donating $1 billion to help India, but he really probably only donated like something that's worth like $1 million. And so and he's celebrating, the press is giving $1 billion. So like, what is the incentive? Was he thinking that I want to actually help India? Is he thinking about tax? Is he thinking about actually, maybe this irony of actually utilizing this kind of kink in our tax code? I don't know, but it's all these things simultaneously. Like what is the incentives? Because on one hand, no doubt the IRS will look in this as potential tax fraud. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. It's not clear because it's a borderline case. But at least I see a lot of misconduct, good misconduct falls into this area where it's very easy to see on one hand, this could be tax fraud. On the other hand, this is just a good doer that has a pile of assets that he wants to give to a worthy cause. So how do we figure out what the incentive is behind that? I wonder if he even knows.
By the way, there's a paper out there recently about a very similar strategy, gifting securities where material non-public information about the company, and getting the tax write-off as the form of compensation.
I would add, I think on this, I have a different opinion. I've been looking at this topic for for a while now, some of the work together with Asaf Hamdani. So from my perspective, the law has nothing to do with soft conflicts. This is going to be a mess if the law will try to regulate or enforce restrictions on soft conflicts. Soft conflicts are a space that needs to be handled on the private level between humans, culture, compliance programs, but it has nothing to do with any attempt of the law to regulate that, certainly not through litigation. So I have very, very strong feeling about that it's going to be a disastrous attempt to try to do it in this way. It is more helpful through compliance program, because every compliance program would include an element of education, would include an element of communication within a community that operates together. But I don't think that the law can. In fact, it's going to inflict so much damage if the law will try to go that direction, that we will be much better off leaving it to arrangements which are out of court and out of the formal law, and more within human behavior and compliance programs and other soft arrangements, I would call them, in that area.
Okay, so it's a follow-up on Zohar's response to Gideon's first note. So Zohar, you mentioned reputational concerns. So of course, managers and directors have reputational concerns, but the question is towards what, or for what, or to whom, right? So like your recent co-author, Doron Levit, has a paper like a couple of years ago about directors' reputational concerns. And the point there is that it depends on the prevalent norms, right? If you're living in a country or in a community where there's a bad corporate governance, like a lot of tunneling controlling shareholders, then you as a director would have to maintain a reputation for helping the controlling shareholders to tunnel. So I guess, so sure, there are reputational concerns, but they operate in the shadow of the law, in the shadow of regulation. And so you would need like the business code to say what should be the norms and how you should behave. And you need the regulator to come strong on certain things. And even if it's just 5%, you need to make an example out of them and go hard at them, or else nothing, promises that the reputational concerns will certainly push them in that direction rather than in the opposite direction.
I completely agree with every word that you just said. I don't think there is a contradiction between what I said and what you're saying. I think it's the same thing. All I say is whenever you create a regulation, that regulation comes within a context. If you are in a context of a country where the norm is that you are a good sport if you cheat the IRS, or you are a good sport if you expropriate the minority, then the rules that I would devise there would be completely different than a country in which none of this, it's like the norm is it's not done. Obviously, there is, all I'm trying to say, we have to be mindful about the context of the regulation. I'm not saying that there is no need to regulation. It's not my statement. It's not about leave aside, people are honest and everything is going to work. As you know, I myself thought in many contexts that the regulation needs to be strengthened, given what I believe the trade-off between the loyal and disloyal activities. So I'm not against regulation. I'm not against the law. I'm not against enforcement. I'm not against criminal activity enforcement. I'm just saying every type of regulation is within a context. And if we will stay with the context that one side is evil and the other side is sent, then we will devise regulation which is not fine-tuned to relevant on the ground realities. It's not the same to be in Israel. It's not the same to be in England. It's not the same to be in Italy. It's not the same to be in Mexico. It's in different places. I just finished teaching a class. I had a student from Mexico who was coming on to ask me questions. Say, okay, how can we improve how can we improve the corporate governance in Mexico when judges take bribe? Okay, so in that context, you completely have a different reality to deal with in terms of the regulation that you need to operate. But I completely agree with everything you said. I don't think there is a contradiction between what you said and what I'm trying to convey.
Michal?
Hi, great. So following up on this conversation, I think there's a question what do we mean by soft conflicts? But I think I'm worried about those cases where we actually make the life of the good guys harder because we don't intervene. Okay, so for example, in Virginia, we have an honor code that everything is honor. Students are supposed to monitor themselves, including the time they dedicate, and I sometimes wonder if we don't make the life of those who are really good harder. Or if I'm a manager, who is not using defensive tactics when everyone else is using them. The fact that everyone else is using them result in me being less successful if I don't use them, and my reputation will be less. So I think there's a point where we need to provide some support for the right behavior.
I agree with that.
That's basically Akerlof, right? If you don't support the good guys, they will be driven out of the market.
Yeah, and I think there's a middle ground between in all these conversations, and it goes back to that snippet I read you from the SEC's new rule on conflicts of interest for broker-dealer firms, and that's to outsource to a compliance or legal or ethics function. The ability to educate and surveil with respect to conflicts of interest without having to come down hard on the you may not do X in a way that generates the kinds of costs that we are talking about. It's an interesting discussion because you have to figure out exactly what the level of compliance intervention ought to be and what levers you need to pull. But yes, that's a new governance mechanism for addressing the downsides associated with bright lines and hard and fast rules.
So maybe there is a difference here between common law, case law, kind of norms, and the legislator in terms of we still want to leave room for intervention by the court in cases of soft conflict of interest because we want to have some level of deterrence.
So I take it as to continue my argument, and my answer is no, zero intervention by courts. My answer, every attempt to try to regulate what you defined as soft conflict, and I assume we have the same definition of that given the way Gideon phrased it. I don't want any deterrence there. Deterrence, it's never a neutral element. Okay, so when you deter disloyal people, you also deter loyal people. The probability of mistakes in enforcement determine the level of the wrong deterrence on the loyal people. And when you enter this muddy area of soft conflicts, the probability of mistakes is so huge that the deterrence and the change in behavior that you would get from the loyal group, which is the largest one, will outweigh any benefit you would get from deterring the disloyal people who would exploit the soft conflicts.
So if I can, so I have one question more to Eugene and Don, but also regarding how can we address these soft conflict of interests, but regarding the more skeptical view of Zohar that we shouldn't, I would like to press you on that. Yeah, so you said, right, that you're feeling as the chair of the SEC, 95% of the people were fine. They wouldn't steal. Yeah, they wouldn't take they would leave the money on the table. And we have a problem also only with 5%. And now, and talking in Yuval's terminology of the good people and bad people. So yeah, so what essentially you're saying 5% of the people are bad people, 95% are good. Now, the problem, one of the things that Yuval can correct me, yeah, but one of the things that Yuval can say, that the social cost at the end of the day, the social cost of those soft conflict of interest, because it applies to 95% of the people, are much and maybe much greater. And maybe, yeah, it's like under the radar, but maybe it may be much greater than the social cost of those 5%. And by not dealing with the soft conflict of interest that applies to these huge numbers of people, we are really creating substantial social cost more than the classical wrongdoing. What would?
Okay, so I will let Don and Eugene say what they think about that. My clear view of this is not a real problem. This is not something that will create social change. These are actions that every action that you will put on the table would require you to read minds and souls of people to come up to the conclusion that this is a bad behavior in the context of conflict. Someone hire a friend to work. You would say, well, it's a soft conflict. They hired a friend. And they might say, well, we have the best knowledge about that person and we think he's the great for the job. So in every context that you would enter, it's all about reading minds and souls of people once you enter the space of soft conflicts. And this is not a place where people can regulate through law. It's just simply impossible. It's all about social norms and about behavior of people, and people can decide, like you want to fire someone because they think that they are exploiting soft. Fine, do that, but it has nothing to do with the court. It's not up to the court to get into this space. So I don't see it, and not in my role as the chairman, not in my role in being involved in so many activities in the private market outside, and not in my role as in the academia, that I see that this is such a big problem that we need to regulate that through litigation or through court. Okay, we can find other ways to try to do that, and Don just suggested one that he's involved with, which is the compliance program. I have no problem with that, but I have problem with trying to channel that to court and litigation and create deterrence on an area which is prone to mistakes.
Zohar, what you said sounds like you are like one of the defense lawyer of Bibi Netanyahu, right? In a sense, right? Because of all the.
I don't know he's on the team.
He is? What? No, I mean, like, the whole idea of, the 2000 affair and 4000 is actually arguing that in many ways, there are very few politicians who will do something for, like Ulmer, for envelope with cash, but there are many more politicians like Bibi who will change the regulation for a very, positive media coverage, or for getting a keynote speech, or for writing something nice. I mean, so I'm not sure I understand. Like, so what you're in a sense saying is that this whole criminal cases are a mistake. This is the kind of the implication.
Absolutely, it follows straight from what I just said. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
We're quoting it to the newspapers, okay, Zohar? We're together with your title.
No, I assume this is I assume this is an academic conference, and I can speak freely without my head of ex-chairman. But yes, I do think that many of the
No,
issues.
I'm sorry I didn't warn you. It's recorded. That's all. No, I'm sorry.
No, but yes, I think it goes straight from what I said about the managers. It's not different.
So if I can just before I'm going to leave Amir and then Ifat, just to roll over the ball now to Eugene and Don, who were less skeptical, at least the way I understood it, about dealing and the need about dealing about these this soft conflict of interest. How do we confront and regarding more the mechanisms for addressing it? And dealing with the problems of Zohar, how we don't want to read right. That's one of the things we're doing here in the group, and we have all kinds of mechanisms, original mechanisms of how do we do without reading minds, all kinds of suggestions for tools. I can give you, if you want examples, we can give. So one like in Yuval Gideon's my paper regarding, let's say, problem of groupthink. So designating one director who gives the initial answer in order a bit to alleviate the groupthink effect. Which again, it's not intentional wrongdoing. We're talking there about and these kind of more soft mechanisms. So I wanted to ask Eugene or Don, what kind of mechanisms you would suggest if you would to address as well as critique. Eugene,
you want to go first?
Don, please feel free.
Okay. First of all, I do disagree a little bit with Zohar. I think soft conflicts can be very pernicious because of what they can lead to. And if you tolerate them by doing nothing and saying, the benefits, the cost benefit calculus doesn't work out well, you can miss second order and third order effects that are really important. I would never want to have a hard legal rule setting forth the double advocacy responsibility of certain directors in a corporation, or try to micromanage the boardroom discussion with respect to monitoring and oversight, and that extends to the compliance function. My own experience is that boards of directors actually find some sort of training on groupthink, on other psychological biases, terribly interesting, and that I would think the next generation and the generation after that of independent directors are going to be more well versed in spotting soft conflict of interest, recognizing slippery slopes, and recognizing the capacity of self-serving inference to affect what a CEO is presenting to the board. I think that's all very important. I think you can create expectations that a sophisticated board is going to operate that way without running into Zohar's problem of making that somehow the subject of itself of litigation.
Just a short follow-up on that, Don. That takes me to one of the points I wanted to raise. You raised it now regarding independent directors, right? So one of the hypotheses we had regarding that, and the good classic examples for the possibility for this soft conflict of interest exactly is exemplified in independent directors, that they don't have this strong interest of serving the interest of the central shareholder, but they may have the soft, and because those are soft and soft conflict of interest, they're more prone, because we have 95% of the people who are more prone to these soft conflict of interest than maybe the non-independent directors, the regular directors, that maybe there is an incentive on the table But when there's a strong incentive on the table, so they're less prone. So once again, the example of how you're counting on independent directors exactly may be one of the weak points, in taking this. Gideon, you want to follow up, and then
I actually want to take Zohar's position. I'm more with you, Zohar, than you think. And Don, to your point, it's not that I disagree, but there are also secondary and tertiary effects to legal intervention. Now, Zohar doesn't say we shouldn't do anything, but once you create all those causes of action, the cost of doing business will go through the roof, and there'll be strike suits. There'll be settlements in the shadow of the law. I wouldn't, for one, I'm a super risk averse person. I wouldn't be on any board. No matter how much money you offer me, I will never deign to be a director. Now, if you add soft conflicts of interest, so who will go? Who will go and be a director? And you can tell me, look, you can have exculpatory clauses, you can have insurance. The process itself is grueling. I mean, to constantly be monitored, to constantly think, whoa, how well do I know E? Is he a friend or a mere acquaintance, or where do we draw the line? And I think that Zohar's view makes a lot of sense in that to me, as law is a very blunt instrument after all. And apologies.
Right, and I don't think I've said anything inconsistent with that. Right, but I agree. Just to connect this to the earlier program this morning, I think over the last 10 or 20 years, and if we take what we heard this morning, there's going to be an acceleration over the next 10 or 20 years in marketplace expectations directed at independent directors, in particular, asking them to take stewardship of certain, things that maybe 10 or 20 years ago would have been very surprising in terms of corporate social responsibility, ESG stuff. So I am on Team Zohar with respect to letting the market do what it does better than the legal system, which is many things. But I think there's got to be some nudge or something stronger than a nudge to make sure that perceptions in the boardroom don't become self-serving and don't lead to sending wrong tone messages throughout the culture of the organization. So I'm in that world of, yes, I'm trying to look for softer solutions to soft conflicts. And I agree completely. I as we go to the Me Too, through the Me Too world, we're seeing lots of litigation. And I think some of that litigation is really, really valuable. Some is not. And this is an opportunity to look for what is our best way of dealing with the severe problem of sexual harassment without going to the knee jerk that Zohar is warning us against of, well, let's create this derivative lawsuit as a way of putting money in shareholders' pockets, as if that's going to solve the Me Too problem.
So Amir wanted before Eugene.
So I'd like to invoke a point that Don made quite briefly, but I think is quite important. But on the way, I'll leverage Zohar and apparently also Gidi's position. So the point about soft versus hard conflicts is actually pointless. So it's like a distinction between direct and indirect conflicts that the Israeli economic code, Zohar's darling, tried to implement and then trashed because it's pointless. We don't care if the conflict is direct or indirect, if it's hard or soft. We only care if it's substantial enough. But legally speaking, if it's material, if it could shift, a reasonable director's mind from focusing on whatever we want him to focus, or her to focus, or them to focus. any pronoun that director might prefer. If it's substantial enough, then we do care about it legally and extra-legally and socially, normatively, and whatever. If it's not substantial, if it's not material, then we definitely don't care if it's hard or soft, direct or indirect, and so on. And now I'd like to kind of ask Dawn, what about the unconscious conflicts? But when you mentioned the SEC's program about enforcement, surveillance, disclosure, the SEC refers to conscious and unconscious conflicts. So assuming that there could be unconscious substantial conflict, how does the SEC perceive such programs, being designed, enforced, and so on? This goes to the heart of the whole conference, right? Yeah. Substantial unconscious conflicts.
And obviously that's a telephone call that lots of lawyers are getting right now. What in the world do we do about that which doesn't rise to the level of consciousness? So it's a challenge. This rule went into effect, I think, last month. So we don't have any on the ground experience with how it's going to be enforced or how it's going to be implemented. But, at a minimum, and, I'm agreeing with a lot of what you were saying, at a minimum, somebody has to go in and deal with those people who can't even imagine the possibility, what it means to say an unconscious conflict of interest. There's, you're going to need a lot of advice from psychologists, from people who are doing work like people involved in this symposium, to give examples of what it means for a subconscious bias to play out. And, not sweep them under the rug. How we're going to do that, all depends on who's asking. What are your problems? What are the motives, the opportunities for wrongdoing? Once we know that, we'll have a better sense of where the unconscious conflicts can come out. But to go back to a paper from yesterday that Adi and Gideon and Holger wrote, that sense of loyalty as a conflicting interest is an eye-opener for a lot of people, and I think is a nice starting point to understand why it is people don't blow the whistle, why it is that some conflicts are allowed to fester, and it's all because of what we're blind to.
So Eugene and then Roy. Eugene, you want regarding the soft conflict interest?
We're having this conversation in this panel. I'm reminded that we're this like on the ground, and I think we're still being pretty abstract in putting like huge swaths of very different kinds of conduct into like, we can say soft conflict of interest, a conflict of interest, even good and bad. Because I think even if we were to go around the room and try to figure out what we define actually is a soft conflict of interest, not conceptually, but like what it is, I think we would probably vary a lot. I've been trying to come up with a good hypothetical here, but I'll give an example. So last week I did a training, kind of corporate training exercise for a board. And one of the hypotheticals, because it was really a session about thinking about issues that can arise around compliance, but I gave the example around, insider trading. But here's how it kind of went, is that obviously all the directors knew that if they are sitting in a board meeting, they can't go out and trade the firm's stock. And that's like pretty black and white. But to the extent that they have material information about the firm and they know that it will affect other stocks, maybe competitors or others in the industry that are highly correlated, can they go take a trade on what I call a stock substitute? And the general counsel is obviously in the room listening to this, and they were going around saying, well, like, how close is this our direct competitor? And you could start, they were having a good conversation, like, is that our number one competitor, or is that someone that just is in the industry? And then the general counsel at the end is like, no, don't do this, even though like it's very hard to. But then I'm like, well, let's just imagine, suppose this wasn't one of the big 5 tech firms, but if you're a big 5 tech firm, anything you do is going to actually move effectively the index. Like at this point, they're so heavily weighted. Does that mean as a director of like Amazon or Microsoft, you literally can't trade the index anymore? Because you always are in possession of some kind of material, non-public information that knows how going to affect the index, which is effectively because of your stock, and those are related. And so I think of these as what I maybe a form of some kind of conflict of interest, that if you're a director, what can you trade on and how far is that? Because the correlation. And I suspect if we went around the room here, we would define these very differently. Some people might say stock substitutes are okay. Things in the industry are okay. Obviously, we can't say if you take a director position, you can't trade anymore. That would seem a little, I think going back to a couple of points that like, no one would want to serve on a board if that was the case. So I guess my question, maybe I'm asking a question back, is like, what do we mean by some of these things? And I'd be, really interested to hear as people are expressing some of these points, like defining this a little bit, maybe more on the ground-ish.
I don't view the issue of insider trading as a soft conflict. Okay, it's like in Israel, for example, it's legal totally to buy the competition. Okay, so that's a decision the law decided. In the US, you have misappropriation theory, which give the discretion to the company to decide whether it's going to be allowed or not. In Israel, I have to admit, I tried to change the law and include misappropriation into the Israeli law. I completely failed. It didn't go through. So now it's in Israel, it's legal. So these are for me, these are the easy cases. Okay, so there is a law, follow the law or not. I'm more concerned with the issues that Don has raised. And I completely agree with him that soft conflicts that needs to be dealt with soft tools. That's the way I view the notion that we will enter into this mix, like the big tools like litigation. For me, it's problematic. I find it completely straightforward to say whether it's legal or illegal to do it. If it's legal, if the company says you are allowed to do it, then I have no problem with that. But the issues that are coming, and I think the illustration that Gideon gave in his initial question was very straightforward. Okay, so I see Eugene, I see someone else applying to be consultant of my company. I like Eugene better. Maybe Eugene is not as good as the other one, but I still take Eugene. These are the soft conflicts, okay? So, no.
I also take Eugene, by the way, just for the record.
Yeah, okay. But for the sake of example, I didn't mean to say that he's worse than the other, but just to convey the idea that these are the soft conflicts. The soft conflicts are in the dimension in which, and I think the question to Don was really how will we deal with the unconscious one was like impossible question to answer. Okay, so like mind readers that we would need to figure out. I assume is that this phrase, the SEC was meant to target the area of unconscious racism or unconscious distortion that people have without spelling them out or being unaware of them. Maybe that was the direction, but I don't know how someone can deal with unconscious conflicts. In any case, even with the conscious conflict, the soft ones, I completely agree with Don. It should stay within the soft. Educating directors, fine. Compliance program to educate the employees, fine. Firing someone, fine. But going to court, no way.
So I'm going to jump in because it seems like there's too much of agreement on stuff that I just completely don't agree with at all. So I just want to get the reactions of the soft people to thinking about the credit rating agency failures having to do with the Great Recession, the continual incompetence of audit firms to provide independent audits and to fraudulently claim that they're providing independent audits. I think we have nice people in credit rating agencies and working for audit firms who mean to do a fine job. It's just that when you get paid for seeing the world in a tilted way, we tend to see the world in a tilted way. And I don't have a good soft solution for how to get someone to see their child objectively, to see their child as attractive as they actually are, rather than through rose-colored glasses. And similarly, when I get a firm to rehire me as their auditor and to buy my consulting services by providing a positive audit, I don't think humans are capable of being objective. And I don't think that I know of any soft solution at all to solve this problem. I think that we should be intervening, and when we claim independence in our institutions, we should create structures that allow for that from what we know from a psychological perspective. And that means solving the soft problem of biased judgment by not allowing auditors to sell consulting services, to have auditors work on fixed non-renewable contracts. So we know how to do these things, but the solutions aren't soft, they're hard, but I would argue that they're simply logical based on the fact that we don't know how to solve many soft problems with soft solutions.
I would say it's just short note on that. Okay, so many of the issues that you mentioned go directly to what Don mentioned in his initial reaction, which is the under-enforcement of clearly criminal behavior. That's of people. The second thing that you mentioned, I completely agree with that we notice the soft and we try to solve them through a structure and elements that would minimize them. But the only thing that I agree with that we should, given the sentence that you said, which is so right, humans are prone to those problems. Okay, it's so right. Any solution you would pick would introduce trade-off. Any solution. There is none that will not introduce the trade-off.
I think that trade-offs exist in any of these issues, that there are costs to solving these problems. It's just that society so often ends up in a compromised political position that makes little logical sense. So I think that that's true for credit rating agencies. I think it's true for the audit industry. I think it's true for Sarbanes-Oxley, that we end up with a compromise that isn't likely to do the job that it's intended to do. And we should have a debate about viable solutions. So if we go with auditors, I wouldn't be for, but I see the logic of sort of having a free market where audits have to be insured so that we get a market clearing price on how good the audit is. That would be quite right wing. I would prefer to turn the function over to the federal government rather than having for-profit companies. But I could also imagine sort of changing the industry so auditors only audit on fixed non-renewable contracts. But the sort of the middle position where we are can just be predicted to not solve the problem. And it is, I think it is soft because I don't see auditors as bad human beings. I just see them as humans and therefore incapable of objectivity when they're paid to have a biased view.
Yeah, I wouldn't want to necessarily connect soft and unconscious as if they inevitably go hand in hand. To me, this is the field I work in. I don't think there's anything soft about the money flow associated with the audit function. And so more aggressive structural responses, as you've been writing for a long, long time, make a great deal of sense. Whether these are good people who have fallen in love with with the particular company that they're dealing with. When I read before from the SEC, it's very interesting that on the broker-dealer conflict of interest problem, the affirmative legal requirement is for the firm to make the right judgment as to whether to eliminate the conflict, mitigate the conflict, or disclose the conflict. A failure to do so reasonably is now a positive violation of law. Those are medium responses. They're not the big structural shut down the brokerage industry, but they're not giving in to what I agree with you are the rationalizations that bubble up very, very easily on the ground in these kinds of organizations. We could talk about individual responses to the audit problem, but I'm totally on your side that the nature of the problem shouldn't be put in a box called soft.
I also want to say something, if it's okay, about the maybe confusion between soft and uncertainty. So I fully agree with Zohar, and also Gideon says why he afraid to serve on any board, because maybe someone will jump on him with some new conflict he was unaware. I mean, this I agree, but the question is it always the case that soft conflict of interest is aligned with uncertainty about whether conflict exists? It doesn't have to be the case.
If I may add, Max, so and I have to be clear, because the position I'm making is from a person who doesn't think that regulation is bad. Okay, you have many of my friends here will tell you I regulated to a level that people thought that I'm over-regulating. Okay, but so I don't think regulation is something which I view as something that we should not do. I'm not a Chicago school. Okay, I think when appropriate we should regulate. But take for just to illustrate the tension between the what we call the soft conflicts or not soft conflicts and the solution that because I completely agree with you that we had a terrible crisis in 2008. It was devastating for the whole universe. No question there. But take just the simple question about how to regulate audits. Okay, so now the corporations are choosing the audit. Okay, in the past we have an experiment in which shareholders were picking the audit. That didn't work. This one didn't work. The proposal that we will have just a one-time non-renewable contract. Okay, so people now will tell you, well, this person might have less knowledge about the corporation because they are there for 1 year instead of coming for several years and getting better knowledge. Then they would say to you, listen, they might not cater to this specific corporation, but they might cater to other corporations. Look how nicely we behave with this corporation. Hire us for your corporation. So once you start going that direction, we will start getting all these layers and layers and layers that would affect our judgment about what's the right way to regulate soft conflicts. At the end, what I'm trying to say, we will have to accept some level. That's it. We will never be able to be in a universe with zero soft conflicts. We'll have to accept some level. Well, I give it to you. 2008 was just too much. But my personal feeling, it was because of criminal activity, blatant criminal activity that people needed to go to jail and they didn't go to jail. Okay, but that's just me. Okay, and the stories that I know from firsthand about activities that were done in the market, and no one went after these people are like, wow. Okay, but that's the
so
way
I think trade-offs exist. I'm just arguing that we're making shockingly bad trade-offs.
Okay,
on a pretty continual basis, and when we get evidence of that, we're not fixing them. So were there bad actors? Yes, but why don't we catch the bad actors Well, part of the answer is because our audit function completely failed us. Our credit rating agency independence completely failed us. And what happens after they fail us? Well, those same organizations spend tens of millions of dollars lobbying to keep any change from occurring. So Sarbanes-Oxley happens in response to our earlier set of scandals. Sarbanes-Oxley is a compromise between a right-wing and a left-wing solution that was sort of administrative burdens. It was burdensome from an administrative point of view and didn't accomplish the objectives that it should have been accomplishing. So when we go with illogical systems, which I'm arguing we're prone to do, we can't make mild changes. We have a dysfunctional set of systems in place, and I think we need sort of major interventions to solve these kinds of problems. So when I read about the small changes involved in Sarbanes-Oxley or some of the things that we see come out of PCAOB, I just look at these and say, but you're not actually solving the problem. And I think a group like this could actually come up with lots of different alternatives, some more left, some more right, that logically are responsive. And to debate those would make a lot more sense than thinking we can make small changes at the margin, which I think happens when we think we can solve soft problems with soft solutions.
So on this positive note, unless someone wants to add regarding the promise of this group, I don't see any better station to end this discussion, unless Eugene or Zohar, you want something that you want to respond to Max? Zohar?
The issue that Max is raising is about regulatory capture. I completely believe in that. I think it's a real problem. It's a real issue. I'm not going to push back against that.
And Don, you want to add something?
No, I agree with that. That politics explains what we have now. Rational thought doesn't. So I have nothing to add.
Well, thank you for all three of you. This hard hour after a session of five papers, like it only takes this scale of discussion and lively discussion, as you see, that it has generated. So thank you very much. And I learned from Gideon that no one ever stones you when you finish a few minutes before the time, right? Gideon, I'm right?
You're absolutely right.
Something I learned, you see, from all. So
most things you learn from me are wrong, but every rule has an exception. So.
Okay. So thank you very much, Zohar, Eugene, and Don, and for everyone.
Thank you for the invitation. Thank you so much.
Yeah.